Hello, hello. It's been a minute since I have done an episode. I had one scheduled a couple of weeks ago. I had a guest scheduled, but they were not able to make it. And I have been focused on creating this new program for my Peaceful Moms group. So I wasn't able to pivot and make a solo episode to make up for that one. But I've got a couple of recordings scheduled, excuse me, for the recovery through relationship series that I have talked about doing, where I have guests on just to share about their experiences parenting through substance use using other methods than tough love, because those are the stories that we hear the most about. But we need to hear stories about other paths to recovery using things like craft or harm reduction. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing those. I've got a couple of them scheduled, so I'll be able to put out at least two of them in July. And so if you signed up to be one of those guests on the podcast, keep an eye on your email because I'm going to be sending out more emails to get people scheduled for that. So today's episode, and pretty much every episode that I do, is always inspired by what I'm experiencing as I work with parents or in my interactions with them on road to recovery calls or just, parents who reach out to me in general. And when something comes up repeatedly, I know that it's a good topic for an episode. And what I want to talk about today is something that I've always seen, but it seems like it's in just about every interaction lately. So it's really important for me to share about. And these are the top three things that I see holding families back from getting any kind of meaningful help. The first one is stigma and isolation. And I'm going to go into each one of these in depth. The second is the hopelessness that comes from the idea that you have already tried everything and that nothing has worked and nothing ever will. The third idea is that this belief that nothing can get better unless your child changes. And I'm going to go into some examples of, because I think this can be very insidious and hard to spot. And you might even be thinking, oh, I don't have that problem. But I'm just going to ask you to listen with an open mind and listen to the examples that I'm going to give to see if this is happening to you. Because if it is, I promise you it's impacting your experience and what you're willing to do. And it's impacting the options that you have. And it frustrates me to no end because I feel like I'm watching people starve, even though I know where the food is. So I'm one person saying, follow me. I found the food. I know where it is. I've shown some other people where the food is. But there's this sea of voices telling you, don't bother. She's wrong. There's no food. And there never will be. And it's just so hard for me to overcome that sea of voices and the beliefs that it creates with parents in just a couple of interactions with them. So that's why I wanted to do this podcast today to help create more awareness about it. So we're going to start with stigma and isolation because stigma is so prevalent that you might not even realize how it's affecting you. I still see ways that I'm impacted by stigma. I was sharing some of my old some of my old writings as I was trying to change my belief system about Helena. I was sharing it in my Peaceful Moms group the other day, and I could really see just how different the way I think of things has changed and how sneaky that stigma was. Because long before your child ever started struggling with substance use, you were getting conditioned by stigma without even realizing it. It's happening to all of us all the time. And that's because stigma is talked about like fact. When people use stigmatizing language or ideas, they talk about it like they really know what they're talking about it. We even hear professionals talk about stigma as if it's science. And that stigma becomes such a part of our culture and then such a part of us that we just see it as common sense rather than like moral judgments and misunderstandings. And then, we believe it because everybody around us believes it. And stigma tells us things like you're powerless, you can't help your child, that helping them is hurting them, that you're a part of the problem, that there's something wrong with you for wanting to help them, that all you can do is wait, that you can't force somebody to want recovery. You just have to let somebody hit rock bottom, that addiction is a moral issue, that everybody with an addiction is a liar, a thief, dangerous, is out to hurt you, more things like that, right? That people with an addiction are having the time of their life. They're just partying and they don't care about anybody or anything, and that they aren't hurting, or that using medication to treat substance use disorder is just trading addictions. Those are just a couple. Now, there might be a little sliver of truth in some of those things. Like, you cannot force somebody to change, but it leaves out how powerful your influence and your connection can be. And the delivery of these stigmatized ideas and the way that they get absorbed into our society is so unhelpful. I mean, as a parent hearing those things, it's pretty soul crushing, right? For you and for your kid. Because when we hear there's nothing you can do, and if you do try to help, you're making it worse and there's something wrong with you for wanting to help. Well, I mean, this is just terrifying because this goes against everything I am as a human and a mom. Imagine if your house was on fire. Just picture this. Your house is on fire and you're standing in the front yard yelling to your child to get out of the house, but they won't come out. They're like, "Hey, it's fine. Everything's fine in here, mom." And the fireman shows up and you think, finally, help is here. They're going to help me get my child out of the house. But instead, they tell you to stop yelling for your child to come out, that your child needs to figure out how to get out of the house on their own, that you're enabling them by trying to help them get out of the house. It's probably your fault that they won't come out of the house. They tell you, stand back and wait for your child to be ready. And when they're ready, they'll come out on their own. And you're just standing there in a nightmare as the flames get bigger and bigger. Now, as absolutely insane as that sounds, that's what happens to parents when they look for help. But in that situation with the fireman and the house on fire, you wouldn't stand for it. You wouldn't believe it because you haven't been conditioned for your whole life to leave people in a burning house. Right? I can remember the firemen coming to first grade and teaching about safety and getting everybody out of the house, right? Like, we've been conditioned for the opposite of that. Stigmatized conditioning is why so many of us parents listen to tough love advice, even though goes against all of our values as parents. And that's why you start to isolate and you don't want to tell anybody how you feel because when you do, they're going to reinforce stigmas that make you feel worse. Or they're going to give you platitudes like, let go and let God. Just let God take care of it. And you will feel judged for caring so much and not being able to let go, even though that's completely normal. So then you just stop talking to people because it actually makes you feel worse. You stop asking for help. And now you're just carrying this enormous, painful burden completely alone because you've been told that your instinct to stay connected and fight for your child is actually wrong. You're completely doubting yourself. You've been told you have to stop trying to get them out of the burning house. And so you shut that part of yourself down. And you might even think that you should be able to figure this out on your own, or that there's something, you start to believe that there's something wrong with you. And you end up carrying shame. It doesn't even belong to you. It's not about you. It belongs to the lie of the stigma. And that's that stigma and isolation piece. And then it gets even harder because at some point, you stop needing anybody else to tell you those things. You've heard these messages so many times that you start saying them to yourself. You wake up at 3 a.m. wide awake and your brain is going and it's telling you, you're the problem. You should have done something differently. Screwed up somewhere. A better mother would have figured this out by now. Like, that's self stigma. Now you're taking it on. You don't even need to get those messages from anybody else anymore, but they're still there and they're still coming. And it is insidious because it feels like what your brain is doing to you is self awareness. Feels like you're just being honest with yourself, but that's not what's happening. It's the lie of stigma has just moved in, made itself at home in your brain, and it's just living there rent free, having an impact on everything you think and do. And stigma is not just emotionally painful, it costs people their lives. Stigma definitely has a body count. My daughter Helena was on Suboxone. It was working. She was doing amazing, but she was in sober living and she had to go to 12-step meetings as a part of that. And she was stigmatized in the recovery community and in those meetings for being on it. Nobody would sponsor her in a 12-step program while she was taking it. And she felt like she was wrong for doing this thing that was keeping her alive. And then on top of that, stigma plays a part in access to certain um, prescriptions. She had to jump through fire and hoops to get 1 week supply at a time. It took her a whole day's worth of work every week to get it. And eventually, the weight of all of that, it just became too much. And so she went off it. And the sober living environment that she was living in got very unhealthy. She had a reoccurrence of use and died alone in a hotel room. When somebody returns to use after a period of abstinence, their tolerance has dropped. Excuse me. And that's when a person is the most vulnerable to an overdose. And that's when they need the most support. It's where they need the softest place to land. That's when they need not to be shamed. But what we're taught to offer and what our system offers in that moment is getting sent back to detox for weeks, right? Like, oh, this one thing happened. Now you've got to start over. Probably going to lose your job. And you're definitely getting kicked out of your home with no notice. That's why Helena, was in a hotel room. You're going to lose all of your progress, everything, because you're told that one reoccurrence of use means you're back at square one, that you have lost everything that you have worked so hard for and completely screwed it all up. And I can't even imagine what that feels like. There should be another way, other options. There should be somewhere to go that doesn't cost them everything. Somewhere that treats a reoccurrence of use as a moment in time on a longer road to recovery instead of proof that nothing will ever work. Should just be it could be a blip on the radar that you can recover from without shame, without losing everything that you've built, without being told you don't want it enough. But there's just such huge gaps in our system, and people die in those gaps. Helena deserved options. Every single person who has lost their life to addiction deserved more options. And the reasons more options don't exist is stigma. And stigma is driving critical decisions in people's care. And as that story about Helena shows, stigma doesn't just affect you, it affects your child as well. There are studies that show the difference between in care that a person gets when they are referred to as an addict versus being referred to as someone with substance use disorder. Now, I want to be clear, I'm only using the word addict here to explain this situation. I would never use that word myself because it implies so many moral judgments and that is all that a person is rather than just being a part of who they are, just a part of them. And there's just so many assumptions made about a person who's referred to as an addict rather than seeing them as a whole person with a condition. They're seen as making a choice when referred to as an addict. But when they're referred to as someone with substance use disorder, which is an actual medical diagnosis, they are much more likely to be seen as a whole person separate from just their illness. So having that diagnosis and being referred to in that way in the medical system opens the door to them getting better treatment. They're more likely to get evidence-based treatment rather than being ignored or dismissed, which I experienced all the time with Helena, and I've seen it with so many of my clients' kids. And that's because stigma is so deep in our society. I mean, nothing ever is going to guarantee fair treatment all the time. We have to be on the lookout for it. But the words that we use to describe our kids really matter. And we get to lead by example with how we refer to them and their struggles. Like, I used to think, like, every time I took Helena to a hospital or a doctor or anywhere, that the way that I talked to whoever the medical professional was and the way that I treated my daughter and talked to her and about her in front of them was setting the tone for how I expected her to be treated in a good way. And we can do that in every area of our life. Like we really get to set the tone and we can have an impact on how people think just with the words that we use. And so stigma can lead to that secrecy and silence for our kids too, because they're not going to reach out for help if they expect to be judged and dismissed. If they've already experienced that. And it's the same thing for us as parents. You're not going to reach out for help when you expect to be judged and dismissed. So that's one thing I want to point out that we have in common with our kids. I can't tell you how often I point things out to parents that they have this thing happening that is in common with what their child is experiencing. But once they start to see it, it really helps to have that compassion of like, wow, we're really having the same experience. It's just playing out differently. So I could do a whole series on stigma, but for now, I just wanted to create some awareness because stigma has such a big impact on the next two things that I wanted to talk about on what I see holds families back from getting help. The second thing is the idea that you have tried everything. And this is something that is so hard to see on your own. So just try to be open minded to the examples that I give and see if this is happening for you. Because parents say to me all the time, like, Heather, I have tried everything. I've read all the books, I've listened to the podcast, probably listening to my podcast. I've been to Al Anon, and they'll name all other groups that they've been to. I've taken courses, I've done everything. Nothing works. And I want to honor that I believe that they have done all of those things because I did too. And I believe that they're exhausted and that it has felt like nothing has worked. I lived there myself for so many years. It's such a painful place to be. But what I want to offer is a different way of looking at what you tried and what actually happened. You probably have consumed a tremendous amount of information. Like there is no lack of information. The parents are full of it it's often um, an overwhelming amount of information because of stigma and there's just so many different opinions, right? And it's like, what do I even do? And in the middle of this, you didn't walk away. You kept searching for information, kept showing up, trying to understand. But consuming information is very different from implementing it. That's the hard part. That's the part that I see people struggle with the most is getting out of their brain what they know into action in the world. That is not easy to do. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it's not obvious when you're afraid for your child's life and constantly in fight or flight. If you've been trying to learn new skills and practice new skills and trying to relate differently to your child, but you're also simultaneously fighting this constant mental battle against the noise in your head that says that you're powerless, that helping is hurting, that nothing you do matters, right? All this second guessing that's happening, it just becomes so overwhelming. And then maybe you listen to one of my episodes and you're like, I'm going to try that. You get a little bit inspired. You feel just a little bit of hope. And so you try something different with your son or daughter, but maybe it doesn't work immediately. Or there could even be some initial backlash because when you change things, it can cause fear in the other person because they don't know what's going on. They get suspicious. And then that stigma comes in. See, Nothing's ever going to work. You can't help them. You should know better. You're probably making things worse. There's something wrong with you for trying. You're a bad mom. You should just stop. So you stop, right? Feel more hopeless. Try to put it out of your mind for a while, push it away. I'm just not going to think about it. And then it starts creeping in again, or another crisis happens, or you find some new resource that's inspiring, creates just enough hope for you to try again. But this time, you're starting off a little more beat down. You're a little less resilient, a little more exhausted, which makes it easier to give up again when things don't click immediately, when you don't get the results that you expected. And so you do the same thing. You give up, try and push it out of your mind, try and rest because you're so exhausted. And then that cycle just keeps repeating itself. I think of it like a person treading water in the middle of the ocean. You can't see land. You have no point of reference. You don't know where the sharks or jellyfish are, but you're just waiting for them to show up and make things worse. Right? It is mentally and physically exhausting. And maybe you're like, okay, I've got to do something. I'm going to start trying to swim towards shore. But you can't tell if you've made any progress because you have no point of reference. And eventually, you're just going to stop and start treading water again, trying to conserve energy. Because what else are you going to do? But stop and just pray that you're somehow miraculously rescued. And that's what it's like when, excuse me, you're trying to implement change in the middle of stigma that you can't see working against you, like the vast ocean with all that fear. I can't tell you how often I'll be working with a parent trying to get, I'm trying to get an understanding of what motivates their son or daughter, right? So I'm asking questions, trying to understand how their, son or daughter's mind works, trying to get some insight so we can talk about next steps. And so finally I'll get that insight and I'm like, okay, this is what we should try next. And a lot of times they'll say, I already did that. And I 100% believe that they did some version of it because many times after I start poking into the story of how they did that, I find that what happened was actually quite different than what I'm actually offering that they should be doing at the time. And the problem might not be, say, like I give them some specific things that they should say and how they should say it. And the problem isn't the words that they're using or used in the past. It's because the words are such a small part of the actual delivery. The most important part is your belief system because that drives everything. And if you have a belief system that is full of stigma and doesn't serve you or your child, doesn't matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to override it. So the most important things are your belief system, your tone of voice, your body language, energy behind it, because you cannot fake those things. So even though you might be saying all the perfect words, but your thoughts, beliefs, your feelings, your tone of voice, your body language, your energy don't match up with those words, your child will never hear those words. They're going to get the message that all those other things are conveying. That message is much louder. And because your child they know you so much better than you think they do. Like, they've been studying you their whole life, whether they realize it or not, because, at one point their life was completely dependent on you taking care of them. And it's just how we're made as humans. So whether you're aware of it or not, I bet you they know you better than anybody. So you cannot fake it. If there is anger underneath those kind words, they're going to know. I promise you. And so this is just one small example of feeling like I've tried something, but maybe I didn't actually try that thing. And I need some help with the nuance of it. And I need a little bit of work of what's happening underneath the surface when I'm trying that thing. Right. So when I work with parents, there's so much opportunity to create change, but it's nearly impossible to see on your own when you're stuck in the loop of your own belief system, because that belief system dictates everything. And if one of the things you believe is nothing will ever make a difference, then that's all you're ever going to see. And that's why, like, I have people that I work with, because even though I'm a coach and it's easy for me to see in other people, it's harder for me to see in myself. I have people that I can turn to that help me to see those same patterns for myself, because I know I don't want to get stuck in them. I just want to keep moving forward. And so isolation isn't just about isolation caused by stigma, isn't just about feeling lonely or alone. What it means is, right, you don't have anybody to help you course correct, like I was just talking about. And going back to that, thinking about treading water in the ocean. Now, imagine if there was a stable object to move toward, like land. That's going to help you stick with things longer. It's going to give you a real chance to actually get somewhere. And you're going to be able to tread and swim longer when you can see progress. That's going to motivate you. And that's why things that we try in isolation tend to fail or feel like they failed, not because you necessarily did the wrong thing, but those things never got a real chance because there wasn't that stable thing there. There wasn't anybody there to help you observe and look for the nuance in there and what needed to be changed and what was underneath it and what happened. And this is how we go back over it and try it again. So when you feel like I've tried everything, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything you've tried has failed. It just means you're missing some pieces, right? It's trying to put a 1,000-piece puzzle together, right? And you're missing some of the critical pieces. And it really helps when somebody can come along and just hand those to you. Another challenge that is created by stigma is even that idea of what something working means. Because a lot of times, I know this was for me, like immediate abstinence and lifelong recovery was what it meant if anything was working. I had no other measurement. But in reality of the human change process, there's slow incremental changes when things are working, like less arguments, more connection, more calm, more open sharing, building trust, right? It's a process. We we have to look at all of those things. Imagine if we thought of everything else like we think about recovery. I hear all the time that if a person has a slip up, or not even a slip up, but they're struggling not to slip up, that they just don't want it bad enough, or they don't care. They're not serious about it, or that 90 days of recovery is no big deal, Let's see how they're doing in a year. Or I told my child not to ever even reach out to me until they have 2 years in recovery. We can be extremely critical of the human change process when it comes to a person with substance use disorder and their recovery. But now let's think of this in the context of dieting. If you eat a cookie, does it mean that you don't want to lose weight or you don't care? Is 90 days of healthy eating not an incredible accomplishment? What if none of the pounds you lost counted until you achieved your goal weight and maintained it for 2 years? Can you imagine how absolutely defeating that would feel? Now think about how much easier it would feel if you were able to celebrate, like, "Yes, I drank more water today. I made healthier choices. I'm moving my body more. I'm feeling stronger." Every time you lost a tenth of a pound, right? Any step that gets you closer to where you want to go is a win. The only difference in how we look at weight loss versus recovery is stigma. And the irony here is that parents tell me exactly how their kids are doing the same thing. They'll tell me like their son or daughter is convinced that nothing will ever work, that nothing's ever going to help them, and they're frustrated because they just really want their kids to try because they know if they try that things can get better for them. But at the same time, the parent is believing that nothing can change for them, that they've already tried everything, that nothing's ever going to work, that they're not able to see how support and skills could change things for them. So again, that's another parallel experience. The third thing and final piece that I'm going to talk about today is that's holding parents back from getting any kind of meaningful help is the belief that things can only get better if your child changes, that that's the only answer. So when parents sign up for a road to recovery call with me, I have them fill out this form. I call it a get to know you form. And I spend about an hour with that form before the call, just thinking through their situation and what's going to help them. And one of the questions on that form is on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to do something different? It's almost always a 10 because they know something has to change because they don't want to live this way anymore. Then I ask the question on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you believe that things can actually improve for you and your child? And the number on the scale that they choose is always a 5. Most of the time, I shouldn't say always. Right around there, five's definitely the most, close to 5. And they usually say that it's because they've already tried everything and because they have lost hope that their child will ever change. So that 5 and the beliefs behind it override that level 10 willingness to change, right? That's what keeps them stuck. That 10 really doesn't matter anymore because that 5 belief that nothing will ever work keeps them from taking action that will actually change things. So, because stigma isolates you, and isolation means everything you try alone never really gets a chance to work because you don't have that objective outside support that makes you feel like nothing ever will work. Then, of course, there's only one place left to put your hope, right? Your child has to be the one who changes. Because if nothing you do makes a difference, like stigma says, then the only way for things to get better is for them to change. And it's such a hard place to be, but there's just so many things that we can do. Like, the more I do this work, the more I realize, like, the moment I found craft, I was on fire for it. Like, wow, this is like what I have been hoping for and praying for and looking for. Like, I knew there had to be a way that I could help. And the longer I do this work, the bigger that gets, the more I can see, like, we have it is just such an injustice that we're told we're powerless and there's nothing that we can do to help. And we just there's just endless possibilities of what we can do to change our situation. I saw and one of the ways is for us to be really regulated and be that strong, steady, safe presence. And I saw this video the other day, and it was a great illustration. I don't even know what it was meant to be for, but when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is a great example of nervous system regulation," and the impact that a regulated parent can have on their child, because we know our kids are dysregulated, and we tend to get just as dysregulated as they are. It just plays out in different ways for us. And so this cartoon was it was these 2 penguins, and one of the penguins was kind of looked like icy and just standing there very calmly, and the other penguin was raging. It was making these noises, you could tell it was yelling at the icy looking penguin, and it had just flames shooting off its back, and the icy penguin didn't react at all, it just stood there. It didn't try to talk the raging penguin out of raging or explain why it shouldn't be so upset. And eventually, it just wrapped its arms around that fiery penguin and held on. And slowly, like, the flames start to go out, and eventually that raging penguin just melted into the hug, and the fire was gone. And we can have that effect on people, like, calm is contagious, just like a smile. And, there was no discussion. It was just presence, acceptance, love, and not getting caught up in the flames. There's actually real science behind how that works. It's called entrainment. And say, if I hang 5 clocks with a pendulum on a wall and I have the pendulums start off all swinging differently, like so they're not in sync, eventually, without anybody touching them or doing anything, those clocks pendulums will all sync up because the vibrations in the room pull them into the same rhythm. It's called entrainment. And it happens with heart cells in a petri dish. It happens with musicians playing together. Happens with 2 people who are connected. And right, so you're that pendulum in your child's life. And if you're swinging in fear and urgency and panic, like, that's the rhythm. But if you're swinging calm, clear, right? That steady presence, because when you're steady, calm, and clear, you're consistent and predictable. Consistent and predictable equals safe, right? You're creating that environment, and you don't even have to force it. All right, like that's what I love about that cartoon with the penguins. You just have to maintain that regulated rhythm that brings stability to the relationship. And this is why I love craft so much, because that's what all the research behind craft shows, is that it's one of the most supportive approaches that we have, because when a parent changes how they respond, it increases the likelihood that their child will engage with some form of help. And you don't have to wait for them to be ready or want to change. Like, we can start doing craft before that because craft helps create the best conditions for somebody to want to change. Now, I want to be very clear that I'm not saying that it's your job to fix them, right? Or if they don't get better, it means you didn't do it right. I'm not saying that at all. That would just be more blame and stigma and putting all the weight on your shoulders, which we don't want to do. But what I want you to hear there is you do have influence over this situation. You have influence over yourself, how you experience this, your home, your relationship with your child. And that influence really can change what's possible. It can open up all kinds of new opportunities. But even if your child say they never get lifelong recovery, even if the only thing that changes is how you show up, your life can still get better. You don't have to live in this constant turmoil. Your relationship with your child can get better even if they never get into recovery. I developed so much better of a relationship with Helena before she ever got into recovery. And you can stop carrying all of this guilt. So much of the guilt that we carry is because of how we're showing up in these ways that don't align with our values. And you just don't have to do that anymore. You get to feel good about who you are in this, regardless of what your child does next, right? And that is not meant as a consolation prize. Like, that is real, tangible, that is available to you. And it doesn't require your child to do anything first. And it puts you back in the driver's seat of your life. Because there is so much, I tell you, so much low hanging fruit in front of you that has nothing to do with whether your child changes or not. And the version of you that starts picking that low hanging fruit and working on those things in your life that help you show up calm and skilled, well rested, clear headed, and dare I even say a little bit happy. That is also the version of you that is most likely to create the best possible conditions for your child to want to change. So let me just circle back to everything. Stigma helps form the beliefs about addiction that cause isolation. And that isolation means everything that you tried alone with no help you see what's going well, what parts you want to throw out, the parts you want to keep, what you can, just keep even doing the same thing over and over again, right? You're doing it right. It's just going to take a little bit of time to get those results. It's actually is working. And but when you don't get the results that you want, then you start to lose hope. And then your only hope becomes my child has to change. And that just leaves you on the sidelines of your whole life, desperately waiting for them to change, feeling completely powerless. And that feels like three separate problems, but it's like one trap with these really deep layers, and they all build on each other and impact each other. So, if you feel like you've tried everything, I just want you to consider if that's actually true or not. And be kind to yourself as you're considering that because this is hard. You've been trying alone and conditions stacked against you, as I've spent this whole episode explaining, while just carrying all this shame on top of it. So hard. And the answer is definitely not trying harder by yourself. It's to get support to not be alone in this anymore. So if you would like to try doing this with support instead of doing it alone, there is a link in the show notes for a road to recovery call. I would love to meet with you and find out more, share with you more about how I can support you. So, thank you for listening and being here today. And I will have another episode for you soon. Take care.